Racist police chief arrests black girl selling lemonade, but her father's identity leaves him stunned. Nestled in the core of a varied suburban town, Oakwood High School was going to serve as the hub of an epicenter of unanticipated conflict when Jasmine Carter, a brilliant and aspirational black girl 16 years old, put up her lemonade business for charity. She had no concept of the ingrained prejudices she would come against as tensions rose and disputes grew. Police Chief Ryan Callahan, annoyed at the shifting population of the town, spotted Jasmine's stand as a chance to exercise his power. But when Jasmine's father Marcus showed up on the scene, Marcus was not any parent. His situation unexpectedly changed. His presence was about to transform everything. Who was this enigmatic father, and why was his presence so vital to the events developing? How would the collision of a well-meaning adolescent with a biased police chief and a father with a past buried spark a fireball of transformation in Oakwood? Let's discover. Before we delve into this riveting narrative, let me know where your video from today. If you like this video, remember to subscribe for the last bell run at Oakwood High School. Calling the conclusion of another busy day of instruction, students spilled out of the building. Their conversation and laughing permeated the air with a fervor of freedom. Among them was 16-year-old Jasmine Carter, whose set her apart from her friends. Jasmine's deep brown eyes sparkled, determined stride set with intention as she modified her rucksack loaded with anatomy and biology. Unlike many of her classmates excitedly talking about their afternoon trip plans to the mall, basketball game, or Jasmine's head was preoccupied with more weighty recent viral videos matters. As Jasmine strolled down the school stairs, she couldn't help but hear snippets of chatter all around her. "I can't wait for the party this weekend. You saw that new TikTok challenge?" one girl shrieked to her pal.
A boy
yelled, high-fiving his friends. Jasmine smiled gently as she passed them, but secretly she felt even as she engaged in normal teenage activities, her dreams transcended the confines of Oakwood and the boundaries of teenage issues. Jasmine's desire of becoming a doctor wasn't only a hazy idea of future success. She was driven every day by a calling. She was walking home when her thoughts turned to the faces of the people she intended to assist one day: children in emerging nations battling avoidable diseases, old patients requiring compassionate treatment, and families ripped apart by health crises they could not afford to treat. The sound of laughing from a local playground brought Jasmine back to the present. She stopped observing a group of kids playing on the slides and swings. Their carefree joy was contagious, but it also acted as a clear reminded of the global disparities in wealth, and questioned why so many youngsters like them lacked access to fundamental health care or the chance to just be children. This idea enhanced Jasmine's resolve. Her lemonade stand was her first initiative, not only a school assignment or a means of padding her college applications. Given the big scheme of things, the money she would donate would seem little in terms of real change for the world. But to Jasmine it stood for hope and the force of personal. She kept walking home. Jasmine's attention drifted to her father Marcus. She knew he was employed by the government, but the details of his employment were usually hazy, occasionally the mystery. Her father's line of work really affected her, especially since her friends conjectured about what Mr. Carter worked for a living. But Jasmine saw the need of moderation. She valued her father's seclusion. Lost in contemplation, Jasmine almost missed the community center as she went by. The peeling paint and faded signs could not lessen the vivid vitality coming from children's laughter. Mixed with the bounce of basketballs floated through the open windows. Jasmine grinned, remembering the hours she had volunteered there, working with after-school programs and tutoring younger children. Programming on instinct, Jasmine decided to stop in as she pulled open the familiar aroma of floor. Miss Thompson, the hardworking director of the institution, greeted her with cleaner and chalk dust. She turned from the front desk with a "Jasmine, what a nice surprise you are, sweetie." Her smile is expanding as she approaches the desk. "I'm good, Miss Thompson. Just wanted to see how things were running." Miss Thompson's eyes wrinkled with love. "You know, same old problems still exist in the art room ceiling, and we need volunteers for the summer reading program, but the children are resilient as always." Jasmine nodded her resolve. Strengthening, I was considering the lemonade stand I'm planning for my school project. I wanted the earnings to go. Perhaps we could repair that roof or acquire some fresh books for reading at the center. Program Miss Thompson's eyes filled with tears. Oh, Jasmine, you are really one of a kind. Any sum would be a gift, as Jasmine left the society. Her movements were light. The lemonade kiosk was no more only a school project. It was a lifeline for the center, and the kids she looked for sped to get home and start organizing. But first, Jasmine turned onto Maple Street. She had one more stop to make. Lena's house's familiar image of peeling yellow paint and overgrown grass said volumes regarding the hardships Lena's family endured for her friend's hard act. Knocking on the door, hearing Lena's many occasions of confiding in her about the challenges at home. Muffled voices and the sound of a television from within. After a minute, Lena appeared, her tired eyes brightening. When Jasmine, "Hey Jay, saw you today. He expected not to see you at all." Jasmine grinned, kindly, only wished to see how Lena shrugged is doing, stepping out onto the porch and locking the door behind her. Same old, dad still out of job, and mom's picking up additional shifts. Jasmine's heart sunk. She knew how much more she could help at home. She was thinking about leaving the diner. Though Lena had battled hard in her studies, the idea of her buddy giving up on education completely was unbearable. "Lena, I know things are difficult, but you cannot give up," Jasmine replied, gently resting a hand on her friend's. Lena scoffed. "You're brilliant and capable. You simply need to believe in yourself." But there was no real bite to it. "Simple for you to say, Miss Straw. Not all of us are suited for the complete school thing." Jasmine shook her head firmly. "It's not about being cut out for it. It's about tenacity. You only have to start small and believe things can change." As she talked, a concept started to develop in Jasmine's head. "Why not you? Help me with my lemonade sale this weekend. It's for charity, and I could use an extra pair of shoes." Lena's raised an eyebrow at a lemonade stand. "Are we not a little old for?" Jasmine laughed. "It for a school assignment, but more importantly, it's for the community center, every tiny bit." "Tells you." Lena shook her head, then hesitated. "I'm sorry, Jay. I would love to, but Mom needs help with some extra shifts at the cafe. Maybe next weekend is busy." Jasmine nodded, attempting to disguise her displeasure. "I know she worries. Take care." Jasmine bid Lena farewell and carried on her trek home, feeling a mix of feelings. Her lemonade stand was turning into more than just a school project or means of charitable funding. Was a lighthouse of hope for the community center and for her, but she couldn't stop feeling a twingle of loneliness, knowing she will be confronting this challenge on her own small scale. She was aware that a basic act of selling lemonade would shortly set off events that would rock there. Fundamentally, the sun lingered low in the sky, creating long shadows over Millbrook streets when Police Chief Ryan Callahan got into his patrol cruiser with deep lines carved around his mouth and eyes, weathered visage fixed in a perpetual grimace, testimony to years of tension. And if he was sincere with himself, Callahan's eyes turned over. As he moved away from the station, the once known streets now seemed alien to him, changed by an flood of fresh immigrants and changing population. He couldn't get rid of the sensation he was turning into a relic, a holdover from a moment fast fading into memory. "Another day in paradise," he mumbled sarcastically. Changing his rearview mirror next to Officer Malcolm Green made him uncomfortable in his seat. At 35, Green was almost 2 decades Callahan's junior, and the generational difference between them usually felt like a chasm. "It's not too awful." Chief Green ventured, his tone cautiously hopeful. "Crime rates have dropped this quarter." Callahan snorted numbers on a page. Green, they drive Callahan's thinking, so they do not reveal the complete story. Wander to the political pressure to confront community based on his earlier that week's chat with the mayor. Issues and exhibit a more hands-on attitude still ruckled. Callahan saw it as only another way to express the outdated techniques. His approaches were no longer effective. "Enough, you know why we're out here today?" Gruff Green inquired, his voice, then paused before responding. The mayor's new community involvement project, verified by Callahan's tone, which was blatantly contemptuous. "Apparently, preserving the peace and writing tickets is insufficient these days. We now have to be social workers and PR agents." As they were patrolling, the car also sank into a painful quiet. Green's gaze flicked from the street to his superior officer, observing Callahan's jaw's stiffness and the white-colored, knuckled hold he kept on the driving wheel. Then the radio burst to Life Unit 17. Elderly woman on Maple Street reports a car break-in. Caller, can you reply? Callahan grabbed the radio 104. We were on our way when he accelerated on the sirens. Now, this is more like Green actual cops. He has a stern smile. They came to a small house on Maple Street, where an elderly white woman was wringing her hands on the. Callahan gently approached her on the front porch, surprising Green. "Ma'am, could you find out what happened?" The woman, Mrs. Thompson, nodded at. Chief Callahan. I watched uneasily as a young man broke into my neighbor's automobile. Utilizing something to jimmy the lock. Callahan's face darkened. I saw and... Could you explain this person? Mrs. Thompson paused to glance at Officer Green. He was. Callahan nodded indifferently. He was a young black man in a sweatshirt. Unusual in this area with all these other types of residents always causing. Mrs. Thompson's eyes expanded noticeably, unhappy with the chief's comment. Then she looked at Officer Green, once more, who was keeping a professional distance even though his clearly tense jaw. Green. Callahan barked, "Go check out the automobile, see if you can find any evidence." As Green drifted toward the car, Callahan turned back to Mrs. Thompson. "Ma'am, don't you worry, we will handle this. It's unfortunate what is happening to this community." Mrs. Thompson nodded hesitantly, scared to express her concern with. After gathering meager proof, the chief's response was Callahan and Green returned to their. Green stayed quiet as the chief was kept mumbling about the shifting neighborhood population. His unease was evident as they went on their patrol. His phone buzzed in his pocket and he looked at Callahan, preoccupied with the road ahead, then subtly examined the message. His was from Wife Sarah. "Everything good at work? You appeared stressed this morning, love." Your Green's thumb floated over the phone screen, a tsunami of feelings sweeping over. He considered the promise of a new beginning that had brought them to Millbrook, the aspirations they had for building a life here, but the stress of the employment, the continuous tight RPP dance between his conscience and his obligation was. It's bad. Nonetheless, he typed back the lie, leaving a sour taste in his lips. "Only a busy day, love you too." As he dropped the phone back into his pocket, Green saw his reflection in the side mirror, and the face turned back seemed older, more careworn than he remembered. He questioned, not for the first time, how long he could go like this, torn between the officer he intended to be and the reality of a system sometimes seeming to be in opposition to change. Callahan's words sliced through his re-gaze on the street. "Green, we're not out here for." Seeing Green straightened in his seat, his gaze refocused on the surrounding area, but as they just prayed he would have, driven on, a goring feeling in the pit of his stomach warned him something had to give. Bravery to choose the correct path when the time arrived. None of them knew that moment, fast arriving in the form of a small girl's lemonade stand and a conflict altering all their lives. Long's late afternoon sun shed long shadows across Jasmine Carter's improvised lemonade stand. She stood behind a folding table covered in happy yellow cloth with an image of freshly squeezed lemonade and a stack of orderly placed paper cups before her. A hand-painted sign raised for charity, $1 aid against the table read lemonade. Support handicapped children. Jasmine's determined eyes as she spoke out to those who pass her speech, clear and bold, fresh lemonade support a great cause. Some neighbors had already stopped by, appreciating her endeavor and dropping extra money into her. She poured a cup for Mrs. Johnson from down the block, and Jasmine's mind strayed to the gathering jar. She had only a few days earlier a rare talk with her father. Marcus's opening about the difficulties of his work and the guidance he had provided her still rang true in her. Typically stern, Jasmine Marcus's typically softening face turned to meet his. Since the world isn't always fair, there will be instances when people evaluate you based on things before they ever know you. Nothing except the hue of your skin. Jasmine had nodded, a lump developing. Though it wasn't the first time they had discussed this, it felt more genuine and more pressing in her throat. Marcus kept his voice low and austere, but regardless of what happened, Remember, you are bright, strong, and you have every right to be anywhere you are doing whatever. You stopped then, ensuring he had Jasmine's whole focus if you ever. You find yourself in a scenario where someone in authority is asking questions of you. Remember these things, always talk. Clearly, don't let them shake you. If you need me anywhere, I will be there. After hugging her father, Jasmine felt the power in his arms and mustered bravery from his words. Her father's work frequently put him in risk, and his guidance carried years of weight. Experienced today as she stood behind her lemonade stand, Jasmine had a renewed sense of purpose. She wasn't only selling. Lemonade was beginning her initial steps toward actually changing the world. As the afternoon progressed, Jasmine saw a bunch of white lads walking toward her. She knew they were from. Her heart sunk a little since they were on the football team and known as troublemakers. She remembered their earlier bullying, but she stole herself, recalling her father's advice of standing her own ground well, while the tallest lads sneered as they arrived at her stand. Take little miss here. One cup of lemonade at a time helps to rescue the planet. Jasmine straightened her shoulders to meet their fixed stare. That's right. Her voice is clear and confident. Every bit helps. Would you like to purchase a cup? It is for a good cause. The males looked at each other, evidently startled by her poise. We're generating money. You know another lad who stated he was carrying a clipboard for new team uniforms, but at least that's something helpful, not like supporting a lot of crippled. Jasmine saw a flash of rage by his words, but she kept her calm. I believe it's rather helpful to assist those without means for health care, she answered evenly, but I'm sure your uniforms are also quite significant for good fortune with your fundraising. The boys shifted awkwardly, clearly not anticipating this reaction following an embarrassing episode. Silence they moved on among themselves. Jasmine watched them leave, pride mixed with relief. She had stood her ground exactly as her father had advised, and it had worked. She stopped to enjoy the gratification of changing things as she had no one else around, and felt this as the beginning of her path to becoming a doctor. Her main objective would be to serve others in meaningful ways. She wanted to share this with her father even if he would, so she got out her phone and slid to his number. Couldn't be there physically. The phone rang twice before Marcus's gentle voice arrived. Sweetheart, Dad. Jasmine's voice exuded vitality that I had just lately completed building the stand. It looks fantastic. I truly believe we will make a lot of money for the handicapped. Children's fund housed at the community center stopped, and Jasmine could just see her father's proud. Jasmine, you really deserve a great smile for being proactive like. Jasmine beamed at her, truly changing things. Thanks, Dad. I just wish you could be here to see me too, baby. Marcus answered, a tinge of remorse in his voice. But you know how business is done. He stopped for a second, and Jasmine felt his tone change. Dad, Marcus sighed gently. I just want you to be careful out there and keep your wits about you. You're doing a fantastic thing generating money for disadvantaged children, but some people might not. No, they might even laugh at you or say nasty things. Jasmine, slightly puzzled by the words of her father, but why would anyone find fun in helping handicapped people? Children, I know it doesn't make sense, Marcus replied softly, but sometimes individuals fear or misinterpret what's different. If they fail to comprehend the value of what you're doing, remember to stay tough. Don't let them get to you. Anyone tries to harass you or says anything disrespectful have every right to be there performing what you are doing. Jasmine's expression softened, affected by her father's worry and support. Dad, I already had to deal with something similar. That Marcus's voice hardened with attention and worry. What? Jasmine related the story to the group of lads from the football squad they had passed by earlier in an attempt to ridicule. One of them commented, raising money for a bunch of crippled people wasn't as beneficial as their fundraiser for. Marcus asked about fresh uniforms and how you managed it, combining pride with worry. In his words, I kept my ground. Jasmine spoke, her voice loud and clear. I told them aiding individuals who cannot afford health care, particularly for handicapped children. I even wanted. Their fundraising went well. Thereafter, there was a moment of silence on their lack of knowledge on what to say. Jasmine, I can't tell you how Marcus talked, his voice thick with passion at the other end of the line. Proud of you right now. You managed the circumstance flawlessly. You stood up for yourself and for others who cannot. Always stand up for yourself. This is exactly what I have always hoped you would do. Jasmine experienced a pleasant sense of pride at. Thanks, Dad. I just followed your advice exactly. And you did it wonderfully, Marcus. Confirmed, but keep in mind not everyone will readily back down if anything seems off or makes you uncomfortable. Don't hesitate to pack and come home. Promise me you'll be careful, I promise, said Dad. Jasmine, trying to keep the worry out of her voice. That's my girl, Marcus said. Don't worry. Everything will be good. I love you too, Dad. Jasmine stated earlier. Lightning makes a difference. She pocketed her phone. Jasmine felt a renewed sense of direction ending the call. The words of her father had sharpened her will and enabled her to be doing something significant. She shifted her focus back to her lemonade stand, prepared to meet whatever obstacles the day might bring. As the afternoon drew on, Jasmine observed an old woman walking toward her. Her heart lifts as she identifies retired physician Dr. Elena Simmons, who had visited Jasmine's institution last year and had been a career day inspiration for her, demonstrating how women, particularly women of color, could overcome challenges to excel in medicine. Hello, Jasmine. Dr. Simmons greeted her kindly. I see you are putting. Your entrepreneurial abilities will be much appreciated by. Jasmine beamed at the elderly woman. Dr. Simmons, it's great to see you. Would you want some lemonade? For a good cause, I would love some, Dr. Simmons answered, pulling out her wallet. And let's donate $5. Now, let's discuss about this source of yours. As Jasmine served the lemonade and detailed her efforts at fundraising for those without access to health care. Listen carefully, a pleased smile on her. You know, Jasmine, she said following a sip of the lemonade, I recall when you mentioned your desire of become a doctor. It's not a simple road, particularly for a young Black woman. Will provide both large and minor difficulties. Nevertheless, seeing you here now and acting like this gives me hope. Thank you, Dr. Simmons. Hope. Jasmine felt a lump developing in her throat, meaning a lot coming from you. Dr. Simmons stretched out and stroked Jasmine's hand. Some people will attempt, but you will confront challenges, my dear. You're not good enough, hence you don't belong. But you never really believe them. You have a great. As they kept talking, Jasmine, a wonderful doctor, is someone with a kind heart and brains. Sensed a fresh resolve based on the words of encouragement Dr. Simmons spoke of coming on. Her interaction with the football players and her talks with her father strengthened her conviction in herself and her objectives, but their discussion was cut short by. Her heart skipped a beat as Jasmine looked up to see a police cruiser slowing down at the curb. The screech of tires beat, but she inhaled deeply, remembering her father's words clearly. Do not let them unsettle you. With his face fixed in a scowl, Chief Callahan got out of the automobile and looked around the scene. Officer Green followed a confused glance over his features, wondering what's happening here. Callahan began marching in the direction of the lemonade stall, straightening Jasmine's shoulders. Good afternoon, officer. Addressing the chief's eyes, remarked, her voice firm despite the uneasy flutter in her. I'm selling lemonade to collect money for a charity. Would you want a? Callahan's eyes narrowed. You acquired a permit for this? The forehead of Jasmine wrinkled in uncertainty. A permission I knew I lacked. Needed one. It's just a lemonade stand for charity. Callahan's irony permeated the speech. And I guess the health agency is aware that you are providing public drinkable beverages, or the officer of business licensing. Green moved uneasily next to his superior chief. Perhaps we shouldn't green Callahan right now, and instead focus on Jasmine. Young woman, I need you to quickly close this down. Jasmine experienced an immediate surge of fright, but she battled to keep her voice cool. Sir, I'm sorry if I did anything wrong. If I need to pack, I can. But could you maybe clarify? Callahan's voice rose, calling the attention of surrounding walkers. I will show you down at the station you are running. Illegal business and maybe compromising public health. Turn around and put your hands behind your back. Jasmine's eyes grew wide with incredulity, but Sir Callahan now bellowed, reaching. Removing his handcuffs, a small gathering of confused people had started to gather, whispering in uncertainty, and concerned phones started to show up in hands whose cameras were fixed on the developing Seeing Officer Green moved forward, speaking softly and urgently, "Chief, I truly..." Could we change our minds, though Callahan was beyond reason in a quick move. He seized Jasmine's arm, whirling her around, and slapped the shackles on her wrists. The metal dug into her skin, and Jasmine bit back a startled and painful cry when Callahan started reading Miranda rights. Jasmine's mind racing, the words of her father reflected in her head. "If you need me, call," but considered her father and wondered how she could call when her hands were really tied behind her back. Longed fervently that he was here right now. The whispers of the crowd had become enraged exclamations. She was just a child. Someone said, "This is ridiculous," while another, Jasmine, felt tears starting at her eyes, but she would not cry. She would not offer them the delight as Callahan started to guide her towards the patrol cruiser, Mrs. Johnson, seen from her last client pushing through the throng. "Jasmine, honey, do you want me to contact your father?" Jasmine nodded, her voice barely above a whisper. "Please tell him. I need him." The plastic seat of the patrol car was chilly and uncomfortable. Unyielding under Jasmine, she could sense the gaze of the audience staring at her and heard their enraged voices even across the closed windows. But more than anything, she felt a great sense of injustice blazing in her. Though Jasmine couldn't hear, just outside, Officer Green was deep in conversation with Chief Callahan. She could see the tightness in Green's stance as he gestured aggressively. The way he spoke inside the car, Jasmine tested the cuffs, wailing as the metal bit at her wrists. She inhaled deeply, attempting to center herself, then whispered to, knowing her father's training, "Her dad will come solve this." Would be rather helpful in this kind of scenario, but she also worried about the implications of disclosing his actual identity to the neighborhood. Meanwhile, on the street, Green was approaching his breaking point. Chief argued, keeping his voice low but intense, "This is absolutely pointless. She is a minor, for God's sake. We should be defending the society instead of frightening." Callahan's face turned red from rage. "At you challenging my Green assessment. This is exactly the kind of disdain for law and order that occasionally is destroying this town. Sometimes you must make an example." Green felt something shatter inside after years of sacrificing his moral principles. Knowing he couldn't remain silent in the face of injustice coming down upon him in that instant. "Be complicit anymore, sir." His voice was steady. "And decided I wouldn't be involved before Callahan could reply in Green." Jasmine stared up at him, her eyes wide with a mix of terror, and then strode into the patrol car and opened the rear door. "Hope I'm going to uncuff you," Green whispered softly. "It's not required to have you restrained like this. You're still a young child and you haven't broken any rules." Because Green worked on the handcuffs, Callahan rushed over Green. "What the devil do you think you're doing?" Green ignored him, concentrating on Jasmine, questioned softly, "You all right?" As the cuffs dropped away, she nodded, feeling her wrists. "Can I phone my dad right now?" Green paused for a moment, then nodded. He dug into his pocket and pulled out his personal cell phone. "Here," and offered it to Jasmine, making it quick. Jasmine's fingers shook as she rang once on her father's phone, twice, 3 times before Marcus's voice came through, uncomfortable and concerned. "Hello, who?" "This, Dad," Jasmine murmured, her voice shaking. "I need you. I'm in." Marcus's voice changed right away from uncertainty to keen caution. "Ask what's wrong. Where are you?" Jasmine promptly clarified the. Marcus sensed an icy fury building inside him. Years of defending his daughter from the cruel reality of racial profiling and police excess, but today it had come to their doorstep in the most unusual manner I could have imagined. Marcus's voice murmured, tight with controlled anger, "Keep cool, baby. I will be there shortly." As Jasmine closed the call, looked up to find Officer Green standing guard between red-faced Chief Callahan and her. She was yelling, "You're done, Green. I hear your career is ended." Green stood his ground, his face set in grim resolve. "Well, sir, I believe your career is what's most important," I stated softly. Now in jeopardy, Jasmine sat in the middle of an argument between the two cops, growing more intense. Her father's words stayed calm in her head as she stood back from the patrol car. She knew shortly that when her father arrived, everything will change. The Neighbors would at last discover the truth about Marcus Carter, and she couldn't help but question how they would react. She closed her eyes, inhaled deeply, then waited for the storm to break. Marcus Carter's hands held the steering wheel so firmly that his normally calm and cool government agent's knuckles became white. Difficulty controlling his anger as he drove across Millbrook streets. Years of mental racing with worst-case scenarios. Marcus had learned from experience and training to approach every scenario with a calm head under pressure. But this was his daughter's situation. Jasmine's first steps, her first day of school, the pleased expression on her face as he drove memories over her mind. Every memory drove his will to shield her when she declared her desire of being a doctor. Marcus had always known this day from the atrocities he had battled all throughout his career. As a black guy in law enforcement, he had personally experienced the systematic problems afflicting the justice system he had hoped, maybe mistakenly, that his influence and posture may somehow shield Jasmine from the brutal reality of racial profiling. Today, that illusion had been broken. As he pulled onto Jasmine Street, Marcus knew he needed to force himself to cool down. One should approach this scenario carefully. One wrong action could aggravate things more. It put Jasmine at even more risk, and now he had to deal with the extra difficulty of maybe disclosing his actual identity. The scene he encountered when he pulled up was disorganized. A gathering of people had formed around a police cruisers. In the middle of it raised angry and protestative voices. Marcus parked his car and walked out to witness two police involved in a furious argument. Training starting as he evaluated the circumstances, he could see Jasmine in her face showed a mix of panic and relief as she spotted him approaching the patrol car. Crowds separated, sensing the goal in his stride. Marcus could hear snippets of discussion surrounding him. That's Jasmine's father. Thank God, he's here. Someone needs to put a stop to this craziness. I wonder what he does for a living. He usually seems so strange. Marcus disregarded them all, his focus totally on his daughter and the two officers. As he came closer, he could hear their debate more clearly. You're out of line, Green, the older cop was shouting. This is insubordination. The younger officer, Green, stood his ground. No, sir, this is doing what's proper. We have no reasons to arrest this girl. Marcus stepped between them, his speech smooth but holding an undercurrent of steel. Gentlemen, he replied, I believe there's been a mistake here. Chief Callahan turned to Marcus, his cheeks flushed with fury. And who the heck are you? Marcus met his stare steadily. I'm Jasmine Carter's father, and I'd like to know why my daughter is being punished like a criminal for running a lemonade business. Callahan's eyes tightened. This is police business, sir. I'm going to have to ask you to step back. But Marcus didn't move. Instead, he turned to Officer Green. Officer, could you kindly allow my daughter out of the car? Green hesitated, glancing between Marcus and Callahan. After a moment, he nodded and reached to open the automobile door. Don't you dare, Green, Callahan screamed. That girl is under arrest. Marcus felt his power slipping. The rage he had been repressed threatened to boil over, but he forced himself to remain calm. He knew that losing his fury now would only make things worse for Jasmine. Under arrest for what exactly? Marcus inquired, his voice dangerously quiet. Callahan stammered, his face becoming redder by the second. Operating without a permit, health code breaches, disturbing the peace. Marcus raised an eyebrow. A lemonade stand requires a permit now, and since when does selling lemonade for charity constitute disrupting the quiet? The audience muttered in agreement. Their rage tangible. Marcus could sense the situation hanging on a knife's edge. One incorrect move from either side could tilt everything into turmoil. Just then Jasmine appeared from the police car, Officer Green standing protectively alongside her. She went to Marcus, flinging her arms around him. Dad, she muttered, her voice quivering. I'm sorry. I didn't intend to cause difficulty. Marcus grabbed her firmly, his resolve strengthening. You didn't do anything wrong, baby, he murmured softly, then louder for everyone to hear. You didn't do anything wrong. He looked back to Callahan, who was observing the incident with a mixture of fury and confusion. Marcus realized it was time to stop this situation one way or another. Chief Callahan, he continued, his voice booming across the suddenly quiet street. I think it's time we have a serious debate about what's happening here. The air crackled with intensity as Marcus stood out against Chief Callahan. The crowd, which had been bustling with angry muttering, collapsed into an expectant Quiet, all eyes were on the two men, the difference between them stark and telling. Callahan, red-faced and bristling with fury, seemed to puff himself up, seeking to re-establish his authority. "Now see here," he blustered, jabbing a finger in Marcus's direction. "I don't know who you think you are, but this is a police matter. You need to step back and let us do our work." Marcus kept his ground, his calm manner a marked contrast to Callahan's anxiousness. He kept one arm protectively around Jasmine, who was shivering slightly against him. "Your job, Chief Callahan," Marcus replied, his voice low but carrying clearly in the still street, "is to serve and protect. Can you explain to me how arresting a youngster for selling lemonade accomplishes either of those goals?" A murmur of agreement ran through the room. Callahan's eyes darted uneasily to the sea of faces surrounding them, many still holding their phones to film the confrontation. He seemed to comprehend, perhaps for the first time, exactly how public this show had become. "This isn't about the lemonade," Callahan snapped, though his voice lacked its former surety. "It's about following correct procedures. We can't have people just establishing up shop wherever they choose without proper permits and oversight." Marcus raised an eyebrow. "Suitable processes, Chief. I'm quite familiar with law enforcement protocols, and I can promise you none of them entail handcuffing a youngster for a first-time nonviolent offense, if you can even call this an offense." Callahan's face, already hot, turned an even deeper shade of red. "You familiar with law enforcement? What are you, some kind of lawyer?" A ghost of a smile flickered across Marcus's lips. "Not precisely, Chief, but let's just say I have some expertise in this area." Officer Green, who had been watching the exchange with growing worry, stepped advanced. "Chief," he said quietly, "maybe we should consider stop it." Green, Callahan barked, "You've caused enough trouble, enough." He turned back to Marcus, his hand subconsciously moving to rest on his holstered handgun. "I'm going to say this one last time. Step back and let us do our task, or you'll be accompanying your daughter for a ride to the station." The crowd gasped at the thinly veiled threat. Jasmine gripped her father harder, anxiety obvious in her eyelids, but Marcus remained unruffled. He softly squeezed Jasmine's shoulder reassuringly before taking a single stride towards Callahan. "Chief," Marcus said, his voice conveying a weight of authority that made even Callahan pause, "I'm going to give you one chance to de-escalate this situation. Release my daughter, apologize for this outrageous overreach, and we may discuss this topic further through the proper channels." Callahan's fist tightened on his weapon, or what he sneered, though a flicker of concern crossed his face. Marcus took a deep breath. He had hoped it wouldn't come to this, yet Callahan had left him little alternative. Gently, gradually, he reached into his jacket. Jasmine's eyes widened. She knew what was coming, and while part of her felt glad that this agony would soon be over, other worried about the ramifications of disclosing her father's genuine identity. Callahan tensed his hand, now fully on his gun. "Don't move," he shouted. "Keep your hands where I can see them." The crowd held its collective breath. Officer Green's hand paused near his own firearm, conflicted between his duty to his superior and his growing confidence that this thing had gotten far out of control. Yet what Marcus pulled out wasn't a weapon, it was a badge, an FBI badge. "Chief Callahan," Marcus remarked, his voice ringing with authority, "I'm Special Agent Marcus Carter of the Federal Bureau of Investigation, and I think you've just made the biggest mistake of your career." The disclosure of Marcus's FBI credentials sent shockwaves through the gathering audience. The hum that had been developing throughout the confrontation suddenly muted, replaced by a tight quiet as everyone pondered this unexpected turn of events. Chief Callahan stood fixed to the place, his face a painting of contradictory emotions: astonishment, amazement, and a dawning terror as the full ramifications of his deeds began to settle in his hand, which had been hovering near his weapon, slid limply to his side. Officer Green, who had been standing protectively near Jasmine, couldn't disguise the gleam of vindication that rushed across his face. He had known challenging the chief was right, yet the appearance of an FBI agent, Jasmine's father no less, was more than he could have dreamed. For the neighbors who had long questioned about Marcus Carter's strange work, where astonished whispers began to ripple through the audience. "An FBI agent living right here in our area, no wonder they always stayed to themselves. Can you imagine all this time? And we never knew." Marcus clutched his badge high, the golden shield grabbing the late afternoon sunlight. His voice, when he spoke, floated across the suddenly calm street with crystal clarity, the silence that followed was deafening. For a while it appeared as if the entire universe had paused holding its breath in anticipation of what would come next. Callahan was the first to break the hush, his voice a blend of astonishment and desperation. FBI, but that's impossible. You can't be. Marcus lowered his badge gently, his eyes never leaving Callahan's face. I guarantee you, Chief, it's quite possible and extremely real. The crowd, which had been stunned into calm, abruptly erupted in cacophony of shouts. Phones were elevated higher, live feeds catching every moment of this unusual clash. In the background, someone could be heard hurriedly contacting the local news station. Jasmine, still standing close to her father, glanced up at him with a mixture of relief and deep fear. The secret she had guarded for so long was suddenly out in the open, and she wasn't sure how to feel about it. Officer Green took a step forward, his face fixed in grim resolve. Agent Carter, he murmured, his voice steady, I want you to know that I was against this from the start. I attempted to stop the chief, but I understood. Officer Green, Marcus cut him off, his tone professional, but not rude. Your actions today will be remembered in my report. Callahan, who had been mumbling incoherently, finally found his voice now. Wait just a minute, he blustered, though his earlier bravado had disappeared. This doesn't change anything. The girl was continued operating without a permission, and Chief Callahan, Marcus halted, his voice sharp enough to pierce steel. I strongly encourage you to stop talking. You've already violated the civil rights of a minor, participated in racial profiling, and abused your authority. Every word you remark from this point on will be included in my report to the Bureau, the mayor's office, and, if required, a federal court. Callahan, lips jerked shut, his face paling as the entire weight of his circumstances crashed down upon him. He looked about wildly, as if seeking an escape route, but found only a sea of disapproving faces and raised smartphones. Marcus turned to face the crowd, his voice carrying the weight of authority. Ladies and gentlemen, I appreciate your concern, and you want to see justice done. I assure you this matter will be thoroughly investigated. For now, I urge that you disperse and let us to handle this situation. There was a moment of doubt, then slowly, unwillingly, the crowd began to shrink. Several lingered, phones continuing filming, reluctant to miss a bit of this incredible occasion. Marcus then switched his focus back to Callahan and Green. Officer Green, I'd like you to take the chief back to the station. Inform the desk sergeant that Chief Callahan is to be placed on immediate administrative leave pending a comprehensive investigation. Green nodded, a mix of relief and resolve on his face. Yes, Sir. Callahan, who had been standing in startled quiet, suddenly found his voice again. You can't do this, he muttered. You have no authority here. This is my jurisdiction. Marcus's eyes tightened. Chief Callahan, your jurisdiction ends where federal law begins, and you crossed that line the instant you put handcuffs on my daughter for selling lemonade. Now you have two choices. You can go with Officer Green voluntarily, or I can take you under arrest for civil rights violations. Which will it be? The fight seemed to slip out of Callahan all at once. His shoulders slumped, and for the first time a flicker of shame touched his face. Without another comment, he turned away, headed towards the patrol car, Green following close behind. As they drove away, Marcus finally gave himself a minute to breathe. He turned to Jasmine, who was watching him with wide question-ing eyes. Dad, she began gently, I'm sorry, I couldn't keep your secret. Marcus sighed, pulling her into a tight hug. It's okay, sweetheart, you did nothing wrong. I'm sorry you had to go through this. Jasmine hugged him back furiously. It's okay, Dad, I understand, and thank you for everything. As they stood there, father and daughter reunited, the final rays of the setting sun filled the pavement in a warm golden light. The lemonade stand, catalyst for so much drama, stood abandoned nearby, but this wasn't the end. It was only the beginning of a long road towards justice and change. In the days that followed, the little town of Millbrook found itself propelled into the national spotlight. The footage of Jasmine's arrest and the stunning news of her father's FBI background went viral, provoking heated arguments concerning racial profiling, police overreach, and the significance of community. Police Chief Callahan's career, unexpectedly, was over. The mayor faced tremendous public pressure, accepted his resignation within 48 hours after the occurrence, but the implications didn't stop there. A thorough federal inquiry was conducted into the Millbrook Police Department, revealing a pattern of discriminatory behaviors, and procedural infractions Officer Green honored for. His attempts to de-escalate the situation was hailed as a hero by many in the community. He found himself thrown into a leadership post as the department faced a huge reorganization. It was a position he embraced with a mix of determination and humility, vowing to help rebuild trust between the police and the community they served for. Jasmine, the aftermath of the tragedy was a rush of emotions and experiences. She found herself at the center of a movement, her lemonade stand becoming a symbol of resistance against injustice. Interview requests piled in, and civil rights organizations reached out, giving help and platforms to share her tale. But among all the tumult, Jasmine kept focused on her original objective with the help of her father and the enormous support of the community. She arranged a town-wide lemonade stand fundraiser, the event, which spanned over several streets and involving dozens of volunteers, donated nearly $50,000 for the community center and other local charity. Marcus, for his part, faced his own issues. His cover as a local parent with a nondescript job had been irrevocably blown after much discussion with his superiors. He took the difficult decision to relocate to a desk job at the local FBI field office. It meant less excitement and more paperwork, but it also meant he could be present for Jasmine without the continual fear of his covert position being compromised. The neighborhood's reaction to Marcus's true identity was divided. Some were in wonder, others felt deceived by the secrecy, but as time went, most came to recognize the importance of his secrecy and appreciated the sacrifices he has made to keep their community secure. In the weeks that followed, life in Millbrook steadily began to find a new normal. The police department, under new leadership, began integrating sensitivity training and community outreach initiatives. Town hall meetings, once lightly attended, were now filled with engaged residents wanting to have their views heard. Jasmine, inspired by her encounter, poured herself into her studies with renewed vigor. Her aim of becoming a doctor now entwined with a desire for social justice. She started developing a student advocacy group at her high school, encourage her peers to engage with local concerns and make their views heard. A few weeks after the famed lemonade stand incident, Jasmine stood once again behind a folding table on her front lawn. This time, however, she wasn't alone. Lena, her buddy, who had once questioned dropping out, stood beside her in newfound confidence in her stance. Officer Green, off duty and dressed in civilian clothes, talked amiably with neighbors as he served terrible lemonade, and there in the background, Marcus watched with pride as his daughter continues to make a difference, one cup of lemonade at a time. The road ahead was long, and there will definitely be more hurdles to endure, but as he glanced at the eclectic bunch of people gathered on his lawn, united in purpose and community, Marcus felt something he hadn't experienced in a long time: hope. As the sun began to set, casting a pleasant radiance over the scene, Jasmine caught her father's eye and smiled. In that instant, both of them realized that while the lemonade stand and incident had changed their lives forever, it had also opened the door to a future filled with possibility for good change. When the community-wide lemonade stand fundraiser was closing down, Jasmine observed Dr. Elena Simmons standing quietly at the edge of the crowd. Their eyes met, and Dr. Simmons approached with a bright grin. "Jasmine, my darling," Dr. Simmons said, her eyes gleaming with pride. "I've been monitoring the changes you've spurred since the day I watched what happened with Chief Callahan, and I must say you handled yourself with incredible poise." Jasmine felt a wave of emotion as the older woman's words, "Dr. Simmons, I don't know what to say. Your words that day about the problems I'd encounter, I had no idea how fast they'd come true." Dr. Simmons softly placed a hand on Jasmine's shoulder. "Remember when I knew it wouldn't be easy? I had no idea how soon you'd be challenged, but look at what you've accomplished already." She gestured to the various mix of individuals gathering around, united in purpose. "This is just the beginning, Jasmine. The road ahead will be tough, yet every life you touch, every person you aid, feel recognized and loved, for that will make it all worthwhile." Jasmine nodded, feeling a renewed sense of purpose wash over her. "Thank you, Dr. Simmons, for everything. I won't let you down. I know you won't," Dr. Simmons answered with a warm smile. "Smile now. How about one last cup of lemonade for an aging doctor?" When Jasmine poured the lemonade, She gazed around at the scene before her father speaking with neighbors, Lena laughing with some classmates, Officer Green talking community initiatives with a gathering of interested individuals. She realized that her basic lemonade stand had become so much more than a fundraiser. It had become a catalyst for change, a symbol of hope and a monument to the power of standing up for what's right. A modest lemonade stand that turned into a catalyst for change, reminding us all that even the tiniest actions can have long-reaching implications. Jasmine's story illustrates us the power of sticking up for what's right even in the face of hardship. If you were Officer Green ripped, would you have stood up to Chief Callahan between your obligation and what you believe is right? Marcus would. You have come clean about your actual identity to guard your daughter's share of ideas. In the comments below, I would. If you enjoy this account of Jasmine and her lemonade stand as much as I did, love to hear your point of view. Selected another one that would make your heart warm as well. Please don't miss it. Click here right now. Disclaimer. This channel stands against all forms of intolerance, discrimination, racism, and violations of human rights. The stories shared here are original creations, developed to encourage reflection, understanding, and constructive dialogue. All content is produced with a commitment to respecting diversity and honoring human dignity.